Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Radio Ramadan 87.7 FM program Reflections with your host Zubair Akram and my guest Sheikh Ridwan Muhammad. In today's session, inshallah, we will explore a few more layers of Surah Quraysh, 106 Surah of Quran with 4 ayahs only. And we've done a few sessions on the first 2 ayahs, exploring the meaning of ilaf, the protected root, protection, and then inshallah today with Sheikh Rizwan we'll explore the significance of why we have why we recite فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ and not فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبّ. Yani, what's the significance of remembering Lord of the house and not remembering your Lord? Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So, Sheikh, the significance of فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. What's the connection between the previous ayahs and what's the significance of remembering Allah with the reference of His house?
Yeah, that's obviously that's a question which perhaps seems in some ways obvious, but in some ways it's not obvious, because if you connect the whole revelation up until now, we've looked at Surah Al-Fil, we've looked at the first couple of verses of Surah Quraysh, and what we've come to the conclusion of is that there's a type of protection, there's a type of security and safety within the precinct itself. We also talked about that. Remember, we talked about the fact the Prophet was sent to that area, and he's the final prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sent to that specific area, and the area to prepare that final coming was made a place of sanctuary, it was made a place of safety, it was made a place out of the clutches of major regional powers. So in some ways you could call it a backwater in terms of politically, socially, but had a very strong tribal system, and the Quraysh were at the center of that, remember. So the Quraysh themselves were understood to be honored, to be dignified, to have a sense of nobility as well. But they leveraged that, remember, through what we call the ilaf contracts, which are the contracts and the agreements that they took and created with the other empires around them. So they embedded themselves in some way in a specific geographical location. And that place, which is the place of embedment, is Makkah al-Mukarramah. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them Surah Al-Fil and they hear it and they ponder over it and the protection that they have over it, there's an interesting aspect there, which is the protected nature of the house, which comes from the narratives of why Abraha wanted to go there, what he wanted to do to the Kaaba, the destruction that he wanted to wreak upon the city itself. That was part of the narrative, and the other narrative was the protection that God gave the place through the fear that was placed within Abraha and this sense of foreboding that was given to him and his army of the fact that we protected even before you had the intervention of supernatural input, which is this utilization of birds of war, essentially. I mean, nowadays we do utilize animals. Like I was watching a program recently about falcons and the way that they train falcons. So you can train a falcon from wild to obey. So when you see, in the Khalij, for example, they do falcon training, and so the falcon falls in the arm of the person that's training it. That takes a lot of time, and it requires you to blind the falcon itself from the outside world in a sense, and just have a tunnel vision. So people can, in the First and Second World War, they used pigeons for communication. So animals have been used and birds have been used, and it's just another step, a synchronized, collective, powerful step to the point that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala harnesses birds. And if you've ever been around flocks of birds, especially birds that fly in formation, you'll see that they're very regimented, very orderly. And if you see, birds that migrate from one continent to the other, like there's birds that migrate from South Africa all the way up to Russia, they migrate in forms and almost like an army regiment. So that was utilized and leveraged by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to complete the destruction and humiliation of the army that tried to attack the house. So Al-Ila fi Quraysh is almost, as we said, it carries the baton of the previous chapter, which is about the elephant and the war specifically. And so the house is always in the background here. It's the reason for the war. It's the prized possession. It's the thing that is in possession of something which is special, given its place, given its location, given its context. And that, up until the moment these chapters are revealed, has not been given its due, because essentially it is like when the Crusaders took over Jerusalem. What did they do? They sacked the city, they killed people, the blood was dripping down the streets, and they made Masjid al-Aqsa and the Haram a place where they would throw refuge and rubbish. And so in a similar way, the desecration of the Kaaba through the existence of idols is a type of filth. And this is why even some of the pre-Islamic poets used to say ليس الكفر بالطاهر الأثواب, that kufr and shirk is not a clean way of adorning yourself. When you wear clothes, you want clean clothes, but the poet compared shirk and kufr in that way to being something that was dirty and something that was sullen and something that needed to be cleaned. And so they're not clicking, the Quraysh are not clicking on the fact that God has sent an army of birds to protect a specific place. And they're the custodians of that specific place. But the place itself is not being used for what God created it to be and placed it up to be, which is to be a place of pilgrimage, a place that people's hearts turn towards, and the Quraysh would be pride of place there as being the tribe that would protect it and give it nobility. And they, through that, like Bani Shayba, for example, being given the keys of the Kaaba, one of the sub-tribes of the Quraysh, they would be honored as well. None of that was happening. And so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says لِإِلَافِ قُرَيْشِ إِلَافِهِمْ رَحْلَةَ الشِّتَاءِ وَالصَّيْفِ, those two ilaf, those sense of protection, security, and peace that's there, and also the contractual leverage they have through the contracts and the permissions they have to travel and trade, Allah then says, well, this is all because of something you have been given, but you're not giving its full due to it, which is the house. Now, the house in and of itself is just, as you know, it's stone and mortar. It can be disassembled, it can be reassembled, it can be expanded, it can be contracted, and throughout history, that's been done. The Qawa'id of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, the original plan of Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, but it wasn't a cube. It was actually oblong slightly, or rectangular, cuboid. It's a construction, and so we don't worship the construction. We worship the symbolism and the focus it gives from the north, south, east, and west towards a specific direction. So if you think of the corners of the Kaaba, for example, you have a Rukn al-Yamani, you have Hajar al-Aswad pointing towards, you have all them pointing towards geographical locations. And all those locations are marked, and people come from all locations and they worship from all locations. And so that's a centrality that's there, which is God-given, and it's just done, and there's no rationale, you could say, that gives it that centrality of place. There's studies, there's people that make videos and discussions about the central point of the earth itself, geographically, or in terms of the world mass itself. There is studies, and I think the closest people come to is a place very close to where Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasallam was born. That's the closest they come to, but it wasn't Makkah al-Mukarramah per se. So it's given that special space and place, because God has chosen it. So God sent the Prophet Ibrahim there, told him and ordered him to build the house. And that house is for a specific purpose. And this is where this idea of, the payback for that safety and security will have to be now faced, which is فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. And therefore, fa in Arabic here is, you could have different functions, but here it essentially is sababiyya, which means that because of what we've just said, protection, safety, security, peace that you have relatively, and the prosperity and the pivotal, place you have in trade and commerce, you should now pay back. There's what we call like a tax here. There's a sense of, there's no such thing as a free lunch, as they say. And in this sense, a very crude sense, that's essentially what's being said. It's being said that you're given these privileges not because of your own making. People have been drawn towards you as Quraysh. And that drawing toward you is not because of anything inherent that you have. And therefore, you need to find out where that source is and pay homage to it and worship and adore and submit to that entity that gives you that power and that privilege, which is God. فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. Rabb essentially is sustainer, the Lord, the one that keeps up something and sustains it, and nurtures it. And these kind of words that kind of come in the word cloud of Rabb, which is to nourish, is to sustain, is to give upbringing, is to bring up, like the upbringing of a child, for example, the tarbiyah of the child. All these are within the word Rabb. And so you have been developed and enriched and brought up by some entity like Quraysh. Like, I think of a child, think of a young newborn. Quraysh essentially is that newborn, which through it, nothing of its own is being able to be sustained and brought up and given tarbiyah, given this nurture and nobility. So it's like a parent that brings up a child, and the parent has choices. How do they bring up the child? With manners, with etiquette, with a sense of service and purpose. And then the child can't say, well, I achieved this myself. They're going to have to look at the parent or the teaching system or the education that they had as the reason why they're able to do that. And so this is why you find, noble families. In the past, it was monarchies, but I don't know what went wrong there. But you still, in the Middle East, you still see some semblance of that. For example, the Jordanian family or the Moroccan family, who pride the fact that they are from the Sadat, from the lineage of the Sayyids. Like the Jordanian family are from the Quraysh, for example, and the Moroccan royal family are also from that. There is this sense from the moment the child's born that they have to be brought up in a certain way, with certain etiquette, certain mannerisms, and certain dispositions.
So there are a couple of things that we would pick on from what you've said. So one is that they didn't have anything inherent other than they were chosen to be Quraysh. But isn't it slightly contrary to we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses people, there are races for courses, the horses for courses, right? So there's a course and there's a horse for that course. So the position of nobility is required to rule, to lead, to be the mutawalli of a priest. So there must be some degree of fazilat there.
There is. I mean, that's not the. So it's the fact they've been chosen. It's not that they built it in themselves. Once they're chosen, then they try and uphold that. So the example of a monarchy, for example, or royal family, like the child's born in the family, it doesn't have a choice, and the family is the family. It doesn't have a choice. Once it is and given that status, then it has to keep up with the expectations of that tribe and that clan. So, for example, they will have to memorize, like in the Moroccan or Jordanian family, they'll have to memorize and have a specific, type of religious education. They'll have to have a certain type of military education. They'll have a certain education which relates to etiquette and mannerisms that are just befitting of a royal. So all these things are they come after the choice. So if you think of just the Prophet ﷺ, we mentioned this before, that the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, chose the children of Bani Kanana from the children of Ismail alayhi salatu wasalam, and from the children of Kanana he chose the Quraysh, and from the Quraysh he chose the Bani Hashim, and he chose me from Bani Hashim. That's choice. Now once you're chosen, then you have to fulfill the role. And here, there's always something that's inherent sometimes with people. There is, because there's a famous story or instance of one of the tribes coming to the Prophet ﷺ from Bahrain, Bani Abdul Qais. They wanted to swear allegiance and become Muslims. So they came, and then the whole tribe came, and that took 3 weeks or something, going through the desert. And you can imagine, you can't bathe, you can't wash, and you're coming through and you're sweating, and you come to the city. They arrived in the Madinah al-Nawwara, and the people that wanted to embrace Islam were so eager to do it that they just essentially went straight to the masjid, went to the Prophet ﷺ and pledged allegiance. And you can imagine, disheveled, dusty, sandy. I mean, we can't imagine it now, but going through desert storms and having just your clothing and not being able to change them. I mean, think about it. The stench would have been, you call it stench. It'd be the body odors would enter before they enter the masjid. Let's just say that. But one of them, the leader, tribal leader, he didn't do that. When he got to the outskirts, he'd prepared a casket, and he had clothes in it, and he washed. And you can imagine washing yourself after that long journey, perfuming yourself, putting new clothes on, and he came. So he basically delayed his entry, and he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he embraced the Prophet ﷺ, and it said, the narration say he kissed the Prophet's hand and his hands and his feet. And the Prophet ﷺ said that you're a man who's been given two qualities, beloved to God and his messenger. Al-ana'a, which is deliberation, and I've forgotten the other. Yeah, there's two, so I've forgotten the other. Al-ana is this deliberation and this thoughtfulness of other people. And then the interesting thing is not...
Ana has a negative kind of...
No, ana is different. Ana'a is like...
okay.
Ananiya, you're talking about... Ana, the Urdu ana is different.
Ana, yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
Ana from ana.
Oh, okay. So I've been given to you,
Yeah. So the interesting is not that. The interesting is the person who is asked this, who was told this, said, are these qualities given to me by God, or are they inherent within me? So he wanted to know, are these qualities that I've inherently had all the time, or is something that God has given me? But the Prophet told him that these are given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there is a sense that some people have inherent qualities of nobility, but that's through choice. I mean, in this sense, it's through choice, the choosing, not the choice, it's through the choosing of God. Like certain tribes are inherently predisposed to certain activities or certain traits or certain qualities. In tribal societies, that was kind of known. Whether that was environment or nurture or nature, we don't really know. But in this sense, because we have a religious text, the hadith of Prophet ﷺ, about the tribes being chosen for a specific purpose which the Prophet was going to be sent, then it doesn't clash with the idea that you should also try and nurture that, or you should try and inculcate that or teach that. Because tarbiyah comes from that. Because once you know you're of a privileged type, you will then uphold a certain way of speaking, a certain lifestyle, a certain decorum and mannerism. And so that will elevate, that will keep almost, it's interesting because if you live up to it, it will keep you where you are. But if you don't, then it'll relegate you. You won't excel. Like, it's very difficult if you're from a noble family to really excel, because it's expected that you excel at all times. Do you understand? Like that idea of karam or generosity or bravery. Like if you're brave from a family of brave warriors, no one will notice that unless you lose your bravery, and then you'll be marked as the person that broke the family, kind of norm of having bravery and chivalry
So,
in times of difficulty.
so this is a divine distribution of characteristics, which are given to different sections of humanity by Allah Subhanahu wa
Mm.
Taala for a certain purpose.
I mean, there's a whole discussion in sociology about nature nurture, whether tribes, nations, individuals are as they are because of the environment, the context, education, or whether it's something that's to do with the nature. There's something inherent before they're born, and the jury's out on that because there's no conclusive argument for or against. Because you can find a child that's born of parents, and the parents are no longer part of the child's life, but the traits of the child are like the father or the mother. I mean, so there's no nurture element, but the characteristics, the personality traits are inherited in some way through something, whether it's through the sperm, whether it's through the ovary. There's something inherited through the biological distribution that you can't then rid the child of or steal from the child, depending on
Is
what
it
they are.
true? Is it true, Sheikh, that Ibn Khaldun argues? I've only heard, I haven't read. I just want to confirm with you that even the Nabuwa could be argued as it is Kasabi and not Wahhabi.
Mm-hmm.
So anyone can toil for something.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something discussed?
No, he didn't say that. That's people extrapolating from what he's saying. He's basically he's one of the first thinkers in human history who really focused in on the degree to which environment and which means topography, rainfall, vegetation, economic prosperity affects the individual person. So because he's making that point and he's saying, look, depending on where you're born, if you're born in the rural part of a world or the urban city dwelling, if you are from a specific tribal nation which has speciality in goat herding, or whether you're a warrior tribe, that will affect the way that you behave. And so he essentially is saying there's a sense of prophethood which requires you to acquire certain things. So it requires you to acquire certain things. So that essentially is something that in Usul al-Fiqh is discussed, because it's essentially whether the Prophet ﷺ performed ijtihad, which is to exert himself to find out the best solution. And to do that, you have to better yourself. You have to try and work out a situation where you don't have a specific answer. So you have to create a skill set of thinking. And so from that perspective, yes, but not from the perspective, I don't think he ever meant in the perspective of that God chose him, because the choice is divine. So that's qada and qadar. It's the place, the time, the mother, the father, the environment. All these things were chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The prophet couldn't have become the prophet and put him, like, just to say, na'udhu billah, that it's like a competition where people that want to become a prophet try their best and then put their entry forward to a panel of people that then decide to see who's the best that we can send to humanity. No. The hadith and everything that we know, the Quranic text as well, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. The idea is irsal, is sent. Like, you're sent. You're not chosen because you're the best candidate. You're sent after having been chosen by God. And so it doesn't negate the fact that you have to strive and you struggle and you try and improve yourself. But this is one thing which is prophecy, which is not.
Yeah, so you are chosen to do something because God has already given you certain qualities. And then you hone on those qualities.
Yeah.
Then you live up to them and make them even better. And so you're given an environment, or you stay in that environment to preserve them.
Yeah, if you take the example of the Prophet ﷺ, that's exactly what it is. He had to strive and struggle. Like, he wasn't chosen and then he was given a free pass in every difficulty he faced.
mm,
Or, for example, there's a challenge, and instead of facing the challenge and trying to overcome the challenge as humans would overcome it, he's given a free pass. In other words,
mm,
okay, you can
mm,
use this card and you can get out of Am al Huzn, for example, the year of sadness, when he's lost
mm,
his wife and he lost Abu Talib, his uncle.
mm, mm,
He at that point he has to strive and struggle and plow through that like we would have to plow through it. And this is the point of sending a human prophet, is that we can relate to the struggle and the difficulty and the challenge being overcome by the person as a human.
mm, mm,
So this aspect of the Prophet ﷺ is a human aspect. The angelic, prophetic aspect is the one when he receives revelation, and his isma, which is his sinlessness, is divinely ordained and given. So that's not kasbi. But the kasbi aspect is the aspect that relates to his humanity, which is the fact that Allah says we will place upon your shoulders a very weighty message, qawlan thaqila, a heavy message, meaning as a human you will have to try and carry that. And so then when we watch the Prophet going through those tribulations and trials, it then makes it more applicable to ourselves, that he was chosen in terms of his nature, but his nurture is where he will be shown to us as being an exemplar of a person who should be followed and taken as a guide in our own lives.
Yeah. So one can only be a guide if it is impersonable. So
if it's relatable, you can impersonate or imagine or articulate the scenario they're in and relate it to yourself.
So this modern day kind of mantra that find yourself and find your purpose of life, it has some Islamic roots, that you're finding your purpose and then staying on that purpose, i.e. then find the right environment for what you were made for. What's your purpose? Finding a specific thing for you in this entire universe. Is that does it hold any value in this concept that we're discussing?
Yes, it does, because nature is a reality. People have a nature. Some people have an outgoing nature, extroverts, introverts. We know that. Where's that from? We don't know. Like, is it because they were born like that, or is it the parenting? Is it the early years that they had that makes them introverted or extroverted? Which one's better? You are going to get to maturity when you make your own choices with a set of characteristics and traits and pros and cons, let's just say, that you will now have to take through your adult life when you're now responsible. Because up until the age of puberty, you're not really responsible. Tantrums and anger and a lack of application to anything, there's no repercussions because you're not really thinking about it. But the point that you're socially responsible, you're responsible in terms of your existence, because at that point, you're essentially free of your parents, because human beings are unique in terms of the gestation period or in the womb, but also the nurturing period of the child. Like most animals, within a season cycle of a year, you're on your own. It's very brutal. But there's something, this goes back to this idea of humans as being social animals, as being something that relates to uns, which is sociability and affinity, that they need that whole, say, 10, 12 years of socialization to then be able to deal with the world itself. But think of it, those 10 to 12 years equip you to gain mastery over everything. I'm talking about creation. Why are we sitting here in different places in the world able to talk about ideas rather than go out and hunt for meat and just eat it raw? There's something here which is different, which cuts off from this crude evolutionary theory of us just being slightly more complicated animals. There's this idea of consciousness, this idea that we have this
Hmm.
desire to connect with something beyond ourselves and to connect with meanings that are far greater than ourselves. That's something that no other entity has as a volition and choice. It has it inherently, like the bees, the ants. Every animal has this
Hmm.
sense of God as an inherent natural thing, which doesn't require to be searched for. It's just there. Whereas human beings, we're of a nature where we're animal and we're also angelic in some way, where we're pulled either to the animal, where we lose God and we kind of lose our sense of our purpose, or we have the ability to excel and elevate to the point that we reflect upon the most deep of spiritual realities. So this
Hmm.
actually ties in with Surah Quraysh because, you know, that animal survival, living existence nature, which is trade, commerce, consuming, power, and privilege. These are all related to, survival, essentially.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
But they
Hmm.
don't make us what we are, which is different from the rest of the animal kingdom, which is through ma'rifah, through worship, through knowledge, through worship, so self-knowledge as well, which is what you were asking about in terms of discovering
Hmm.
yourself. All of that ties in with this thing of فَلْيَعْبُدُ رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ, which is to worship the Lord of this house. But it comes,
Hmm.
as you said, from this sense of fulfilling your purpose. And there's some aspects of your purpose which are unique to you, and there's some aspects of your purpose which are inbuilt. They're basically factory settings.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
I think what the Quraysh are being told is you need to go back to your factory settings, which is unity, tawheed, the oneness of God.
Hmm.
Human beings are booted in to as factory setting, default factory setting, which is the fact that you give shukr and gratitude to God, and
Hmm.
then you build your life. You kind of go on that basis. And so this is why, all that, violence of Surah Al-Fil, of the destruction and the undermining of confidence and the destruction of the army, then this all this kind of issue of money all just disappears into this summary, which is فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. And so because of all that, let them worship the Lord of this house. Look at it. Everything that story of Feel has revolved around, and your travels in terms of trade have revolved around, is the speciality of this house that you're neglecting. Essentially, you're just passing by it winter and summer, not giving its due, filling it with idols, and it's a callback to that factory setting.
Reflections with Sheikh Rizwan Muhammad. A short ad break, and straight after the break, inshallah, we'll be discussing a few key topics, which is marifa, as Sheikh has said, and the concept of man arafa nafsahu faqad arafa rabbahu, and how does it tie in with tawheed.
हमने माना कि जन्नत बहुत है हंसी छोड़ कर हम मदीना न जाए कहीं यूं तो जन्नत में सब है मदीना नहीं यूं तो जन्नत में सब है मदीना नहीं और जन्नत मदीने में मौजूद है हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर उनकी तस्वीर सीने में मौजूद है जिसने लाकर कलामे इलाही दिया जिसने लाकर कलामे इलाही दिया वो मोहम्मद मदीने में मौजूद है
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and back with more reflections in this session with Sheikh Rizwan Muhammad. Sheikh, Marifa, you mentioned the word Marifa, um, and it is all with Surah Quraysh. Marifa is a big topic, right? It's a big topic. Um, knowing yourself, knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, knowing your environment, knowing your bearings of where you are, what you are, who you are, what you're supposed to do. As these concepts, they have roots in Surah Quraysh. That's my question number one, and then we'll continue with the rest, inshallah.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So yeah, I think I just threw out ma'rifah as a word. I think you caught onto it for some reason. Because ma'rifah essentially is related to ibadah, which is to worship. So you cannot worship unless you know. So you cannot worship something you do not know, or you cannot imagine the reason for worshipping. So ma'rifah is quite a deep issue. It's related to irfan, which is, in spirituality, they talk about this kind of self-knowledge, or this knowledge which relates to yourself, your purpose. And then once you know it, you can worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because, the Quraysh here are actually being told to do a very simple task, which is servitude. Servitude meaning obeying a command, which is فَلْيَعْبُدُ رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. Because worship is of levels. In Ramadan, you're thinking that, you're worshipping, you're praying Taraweeh, you're doing your 5 prayers. Worship is also fasting and feeding people when they break their fast, all type of worship. You might be paying your zakats, all type of worship, because it's all a type of obedience. But there's levels of it, because if you come into, as we are in the last 10 days, you're looking to focus in on the worship. So you're looking to do it with an understanding of what it is and the purpose of it and the benefit of it, and also the one that you're worshipping. And so if you go into that deeper, then you get to the point where you get to what the Prophet called ihsan, an ta'bud Allah ka'annaka tarahu fa in lam takun tarahu fa innahu yarak. That you worship God as if you see him, and if you cannot see him, then indeed he sees you. That is a search for the fine-tuning of the dial when you've got the general gist of it. So your body is obeying, so you're not eating and drinking. So your body's on site. And the times the prayers come, according to the movement of the sun, you do the 5 prayers. So your body is on side, but you need to now fine-tune it. Fine-tune not the body, but you have to fine-tune the thought processes and the intention and the reason as well that you're worshipping. And the only way you can do that is that you know what you're worshipping. So this always comes back to understanding what has been given to you by God. And at the very core of that is the fact you have existence. Like your existence is given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also in that existence is your choice, like the decision making that you have. But the interesting about decision making is that it conflicts with other people's decision making. So this is where it becomes like people could say, well, I don't want to decide, or I don't have much choice, and or somebody else's choice is making me do something. So it becomes like, if you think about it, God has created you is a blessing. You have the ability to live and to know and to exist, and just to be alive is a blessing. To eat and drink and to just think and to have happiness. When you feel happiness, you see that experience that you think is unparalleled, so you want to recreate it. But unfortunately in life, you have other people that have the ability to do that as well. So you have people that are good-natured, or you would say in line with their angelic side, who are doing things that also help you become happy and give you pleasure. But there's also malignant, malevolent forces that do the opposite, that choose the opposite, that you want to do harm, that choose the path of death or warfare or torture. And so you're left in this situation where life is all about a test. It's all about the fact that it's like going through traffic, and you might get hit by a car, you might not. And if you do get hit, then it's a question of what do you do? Do you get out of the car and you start an argument, or do you you just say, okay, it's happened and let's just sort this out? You might get through without anything happening. Every scenario is you basically crashing in with somebody else's volition and choice. And my childhood, it comes from your parents. It might be, episodes in your childhood or early adulthood that then define you in some way. But you're asked at all times to fight through that. You're asked at all times that you have the ability to control the narrative of how to deal with those situations, that you can be as much as the best version of yourself as you can be, even in the most dire situations. And why do we know that? Because the Prophet went through it. So if you were to say, okay, childhood, losing a mother, losing a father, being passed from one relative to another, essentially like a free radical in society, essentially having to nurture himself, sallallahu, without the motherly love. But essentially he made the best of everything. It was like, you have the idea of, half glass, half empty, half full idea. There was always this sense that God was protecting him, even before he knew that God was protecting him. And so ma'rifah is essentially to come to the acknowledgement that you're in a situation where you have the cards in your hand to play as you want, even if they're a bad set of cards. And it's to know that God has given you that, and God has blessed you with those opportunities and those choices, and you can make a change. You can essentially make a bad situation better. And through that, you come to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in that, you want to know like who were the people that we should follow. It's the prophets. The prophets who were given the worst of all scenarios to deal with. They were given with the most difficult of what they call gigs. Comedians, they always talk about, a comedy show, and the crowd doesn't want to laugh. And it's like they compare it to torture. It's like humiliating and takes all self-esteem out of them. It's they call it a difficult gig. The prophets were given the most difficult gigs. They went to people that didn't want to listen to them, that mocked them, that harassed them, that tortured them, that, in some scenarios, basically killed them through torture. So, but what did they do? They didn't say, okay, it's too difficult, we're not going to do it, or we'll choose another thing. No, they persevered. And the greater the prophet, the greater they persevered, and the greater the prophet, they became known as ulil azmi min ar-rusul. The ulil azmi min ar-rusul in Arabic, in the Quran, it mentions is the most elevated, greatest of all prophets, ulil azm. And the Prophet is told to do what? To follow the path of those.
And ulil azm is the one who decides and stays steadfast to it.
Yeah, ulil azm is like the people, the group of azm. Azm is like tenacity. Azm is like the kind of underlying meaning is the ones that are tenacious and persevering, and because of that have greatness. So the greatness comes from their perseverance. And this is why the Prophet was told, فَاصْبِرْ كَمَا صَبَرَ أُولِي الْعَزْمِ مِنَ الرُّسُلِ. Muhammad, show patience and gratitude, but patience here more, and steadfastness, as those prophets of tenacity and greatness showed patience. And this is essentially, if you're looking your best version of yourself, is to have the patience and certitude to continue on when it's difficult. And that comes from sabr. It comes from sabr. And once you have the sabr, you have this ma'rifah. Then then it's like, like a Rubik's Cube when it's all messed up and it all clicks into place and all the sides are perfect.
So if you have sabr, you have ma'rifah.
So there's a one point in your life where that mess of the Rubik's Cube, I don't know if the younger generation know what Rubik's Cube is, but you obviously know what it is because they do, don't play with things anymore like that. But the thing is, if it's completely messed up, it doesn't seem like there's any pattern. But there's a point. Ma'rifah essentially is when all of the Rubik's Cube is sorted and you see why everything was where it was and how it came back. And this is why they have the saying.
That's ma'rifah.
The deepest type of ma'rifah. You understand the reason why everything is as it is. Because when you know that, you know your Lord. So you know why God has put you in a position and a situation and a difficulty or an ease. Because ease and difficulty and these are all the same. A person in complete easy street is an intense, difficult tribulation because there's no push. There's no sense of urgency to do better. Because the akhirah is where you'll get the reward of that input here. So in easy street, you have to actually push harder. In a difficult situation, even the smallest intention to do good or just to try a little better is exponentially rewarded by God. And that's ma'rifah. That point, Allah. That's why, there's a famous saying in Arabic, "Man arafa nafsahu faqad arafa rabbah." Whoever comes to know themselves, mean the purpose, but it's a deep thing, because know your purpose, know yourself. Does it just mean that you know your failures and your strengths and weaknesses? Is that what it means? I don't think so. It's because everyone at some point will know that they're good at this, good at that, or they're angry, or they're sometimes, kind of in situations they don't behave well. That's simple to know. It's more to know why you are given the life that you're given, like why you're in this space.
ये solve कर दे.
Solve कर दे.
ये solve कर दे. You got to solve this for the listeners.
Why are you
for me,
sitting where you're sitting?
I don't know.
You want to sit somewhere else. But once you know that, once you know why you're in the place you are, you know yourself. Meaning you know the place of yourself in the cosmos, in the world, in the universe, in time and space, in this the era you're in now. That consciousness that you have, which fits into your body.
So knowing that is not an effort. Knowing that is not an effort. It's to do with some kind of understanding, intellect, kind of.
No, it's not intellectual.
Moment.
I don't think it's intellectual. It's
so.
It's
how
a
do you,
submission.
So
at the core of it, Zubair, is a submission. Is Islam, which is the meaning of Islam. At the core of understanding the purpose is submitting to the fact that this is who you are, your family, your social contract, your economic situation, your relationships, the nationality that you have, all this, that consciousness that you have at this moment in time is placed in your body to walk around with it and make sense of the world. But you have to be content with that. You have to submit to that. And then the choices naturally come, because you can't change your gender. Let's just give you that for a starter. You can't, certain limits to what you can change. But there's certain things you can change. And those things you can change, you do it in obedience to God. Because that's the only thing that is going to be of relevance to you in the hereafter. And the obedience to God is, remember,
your life is a result of your decisions, correct?
Some of it, yeah, of course. Some of it's not. Like your nationality, your residency status, your economic status, a lot of this is limited. Like the bandwidth within which you can work in terms of prosperity, unless you're given specific break. It's actually always a break. It's like a degree of luck. It's not even just skill. Because if you think of Tesla, for example, great scientist, lived in dire poverty with pigeons and died alone. Like, your intellect and your ability to solve questions doesn't mean that you're going to be successful or happy. But we don't know with him, like, was he happy? Maybe he felt that the only solace and peace he could have was by himself, because he saw the nature of the world. So for him, God will judge him. For you, God will judge you. For me, God will judge myself. Everybody is judged based upon the environment and the situation and decision making that they really had significant control over. And it's not about the outcome. Remember, I kept doing this in the initial shows about, it's not about markers of success. Like I died with 2 million surplus in the bank to give to my inheritors, or this is the GDP of the country.
But I think what I'm sorry, it's not that, understood, but it is what you've just said, knowing yourself, and that isn't an easy task. How do you know that you are on the path that you're meant to be? You don't know. Are you on the path because of your poor, bad, sloppy decisions, or are you on a path of what God has meant to be on, meant for you to be on? How would you know that? What do you judge that against? What's the benchmark?
It's very simple. If you have the ability to make a decision, you make the decision, and it's the wrong decision, you've chosen the path. Like, God's knowledge does not affect. Like in Aqidah, they always say, "Ilmu Allahi kashifa, laysa mu'athira." God's knowledge will just show you what you've done, and what God knew, it won't affect what you've chosen. So there's no wriggle-out clause here where you can. It's a question of decision making. It's a question of choice. It's a question of, how would you make the perfect choice and how to invest a certain amount of money. You get all the information you want. You'll still get as many opinions as possible on what the best course of action is. Like, for example, now you've got this war going on, and people are, if you just think about, investment, people are just discussing, where should we invest? Is it the American Stock Exchange, British, international basket? Is it gold? Is it silver? Should we hedge against oil reserves? Is it AI? Everybody is in a pickle over where they put their excess wealth. And that's based upon decision making. And sometimes decision making is not easy. So if you're in a difficult situation, or you consider a person considers themselves in a situation they shouldn't be in, sometimes you don't have the ability to get out of that, because nobody knows how to make the right decision at some level. But generally, the way that success is incrementally created is you try and do, you bench against the worst scenario. So, for example, you go to school, you try and get a broad education so that whatever happens in the job market, you'll have skills that might go into that. You go into university, you say, okay, let's get a profession that most likely will still 70% give me a job at the end of it. So, for example, you go to university, you get a degree in, apologize to people that have these degrees, but psychology and Greek literature, for example. That either will make you extremely rich because it's such a niche that if you're really clever, people will headhunt you because you're expert in a niche and you're able to think outside the box, or you'll essentially be, not using that degree at all.
Yeah,
that's decision making, isn't it?
Yeah.
But you could say, look, Steve Jobs, he dropped out of university. He spent the year he spent out of university studying calligraphy, and essentially was a waste of time. And you could say, well, he wasted his life. He could basically slept on people's. He himself says slept on people's floors for a year, and he was fed through these kind of mandar, free food from a Hindu temple or something. But then the calligraphy came in use 30 years later when he started to create the Apple Mac computer, and he was basically facing off with normal PCs, and the one thing that he felt he had leverage with was typeface. So the typeface of the font, because it was ugly. Essentially, the PC font type was one type. And then he said, okay, I'm going to give you a computer with all the same tech capacity, different operating system, but essentially on the surface, same thing, but you can choose the font. And the font was the decision that essentially gave him the active edge, even until now, over their competitors. It's aesthetics. It's about the feeling of using something that they've created.
Yeah, it's experience.
And so if you go back to the choice, he made the wrong choice. He dropped out of university, wrong choice. Like 95% of time, that's a wrong choice. And choosing calligraphy is definitely a wrong choice because nobody's writing anymore. Wrong choice. So he's made a 99% wrong choice out of 100, but that 1% of wrong choice was actually the right choice. So that's just something to do with the flow of how the world works. And you have to control and own your choices. You have to,
and that's marifa.
I think nowadays, modern humans, there is one of the greatest diseases in the modern psyche is looking for a reason to play the victim.
Yeah.
And to be an outcome of your environment. And then to spend your whole life then digging through your past to try and rectify your present and future, which is the basis of psychology, actually. Psychiatry is essentially
trauma, find out your childhood trauma, and then work through it.
It's not to undermine that whole move, but I think the vocabulary and the mindset and the underlying science behind that, even if it's now prominent and it's expanded, is inherently anti-human, because it doesn't. There's ways of addressing what we call trauma. There's ways of addressing episodes in the past that build on positive growth. In other words, controlling, accepting, compartmentalizing, and then storing away, essentially storing away into the past, and then moving on through volition and choice. But that's not the way the world is moving now. It's telling people to to essentially dig up things in the past and then make yourself a victim of your environment and your past. I think that mindset is allowed to fester because it creates a whole industry in terms of that profession, but it also allows the very easy move away from responsibility as well. Like the present responsibility of the present, your responsibility of the present at this moment in time. It absolves you of that. And I think that is, if you look at a whole area, I don't want to mention all the areas, but in the Muslim community, they are prone to that as well.
So getting back to where we started, Marifa, man arafa nafsahu faqad arafa rabbahu. And how does it tie in with, I haven't heard you, how can I say this now? I haven't heard you impress on the concept of Tawheed as much as in these two surahs. That everything is to do with Tawheed. So knowing there is a God and He is one and He is the only one. There is no one like Him. He wasn't born and he of anyone, and nobody could be born out of Him in that concept. So that aspect of Tawheed, is it Ilah or is it Rabb? What are we saying? Are we just to focus on the quality of that being as Ilah, the one who should be worshipped, or the one who owns us and owns everything?
So, I mean, I've not made a distinction here because Rabb, when I explained it, I mentioned this idea of nurturing, of being worthy because of a quality. Ilah is essentially Godhead, is, it's not almost like an abstract idea of the one that creates out of nothing. And because of the fact that God creates out of nothing, He's worthy of worship. Lam yalid wa lam yulad. So, Qul huwa Allahu ahad. Say, O Muhammad, that God is absolute and unique unity. So this is what ahad means in that sense. Ahad, Qul huwa Allah, is Allah, is not a Rabb. So in Surah Al-Ikhlas, it focuses in on the uluhiyya, which is the divine nature of God, which is abstract, which is to do with creation, and which is to do with His entity by itself without any connection to anything else. So the fact He has no son, nothing emanates out of Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He is self-subsistent, that He is al-qayyum, that He is a samad, the one that has no need and is completely self-contained. All of that is regardless of whether there was something to worship God. So if you think of Qul huwa Allahu ahad, say He is Allah the One, is not saying to worship. Allahu Samad, God is the self-sustaining. Lam yalid wa lam yulad, neither born nor begotten. Wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad, there is nothing like unto Him. At no point is it calling you to do anything. There's an app.
It's recognizing that being,
the status of God.
The
status of God. What is God?
The status of God. So, and that's what Tawheed is. This is what you've been saying all along in these last 20 sessions or so.
Yeah.
So
this is Allah,
knowing the status of God.
Knowing the status, knowing what God is, uniqueness. Why is Allah unique? Outside time, outside space. That moment you've defined God. Imam al-Asfahani or Raghib al-Asfahani says, Al-Ana Da'im, Allah is the constant period of time. Like time does not afflict God. Like God is timeless or outside time. Which, I mean, all these things are. Yeah, so we're not in that picture. We're not in that picture. But in the chapter of Quraysh and Surah Al-Fil, God manifests as a Rabb. Rabb hadha al-bayt. Rabb means the protector, sustainer, nourisher, and provider, and and
Rabb is also Tawheed.
Rabb implies Tawheed, doesn't it? Rabb, because no one can nourish as uniquely as God there can only be one entity that nourishes as uniquely as God, that protects as uniquely as God, which comes into Tawheed because it comes into the unity of God. Because sustaining in an absolute sense can only be to one entity. Like if one wanted to sustain, like imagine you have two gods, it's called the proof of Tamanu in philosophy. You had two gods, one decided that, oh, I think, Zaid should have a good day today. And the other one said, no, I think we should make it difficult for him. Well, which one's going to decide? How are we going to decide how the world's going to, essentially come out of this day? You have to have one. That's Rabb. There has to be one entity, that has the veto.
So understand. So what I'm after is that what you've said, the key to all the problems is the concept of Tawheed. Or if you are on a line which is leading you to destruction as humanity, as people, as individual or a community, if you know your God as one, Tawheed, if you have the concept of Tawheed, you are safe, right?
Yes.
If that's the case, so I'm just going to read, since the Quraysh became accustomed to the journey of winter and summer, therefore let them worship the Lord of this house. Tawheed. Where is Tawheed in this?
So Tawheed is implied within Rabb. Rabb is one of the is one of the names, like Al-Qawi, Al-Majid, Al-Qahir, Al-Mutakabbir. This is one of the manifestations of what a God is, a real God, meaning the real God. So also related to that is prosperity and justice and peace, because what I'm going to probably think about now, just bookmark this, so remind me this tomorrow, is that a Rabb also requires you to have a certain moral outlook of right and wrong, of justice and injustice, of peace and war, of do and don't. So the whole thing about a Rabb is an Ilah and Tawheed is that your source of morality has to be one as well. Your source of just war has to be one. Your source of the way the family units are ordered and all the ways that you order society has to be taken in terms of what's good and what's not from one specific source. So it doesn't mean that you have no intellectual brain use in that, but the general principles, the boundaries of what that is, are going to be divinely revealed. And so Allah is essentially saying you've been given all these blessings, and so now worship the Lord of this house. The Lord will be the one that will then, when you look at the Lord of this house, will reveal a book and will send a prophet and will give you guidance. All of that in this environment where you were protected and saved and safe and secured. Now, the one that comes now, which is Al-Amin, the Prophet ﷺ, will now be the person that will give you that morality, give you that sense of justice, give you the sense of dignity that you have. And actually, what the Prophet will do is emphasize you in that, will ingrain you in that, will also embed that further into you as a group, as the Quraysh, as a people that people look up to. And so that's where this chapter is going to come to its conclusion, which is you should now worship this Lord. And then I'll give you again a recap of why that was the case.
I was looking for. So just final moments. Iqbal says, "Ye chaman mamoor hoga nagmaye tawheed se." So his conclusion, Iqbal's conclusion, in the solution of all the human inequalities or human problems is that there's a lack of tawheed in this modern day that we are living. The age we live in doesn't recognize God, and hence the problems.
Yeah, so he basically took that from Nietzsche, who said the same thing. So Nietzsche said that God is dead, but he didn't mean that we're all atheists. He basically said once you take God out of the equation in philosophy and morality and civilization, you basically have killed society. You need God. You need God at the center to create morality, to create a center of existence, purpose. And Iqbal was very deeply influenced by Friedrich Nietzsche in that. And Friedrich Nietzsche died, he went mad because his brain just overloaded with problems and thought, unfortunately.
Shab Gureza hogi akhir jalwaye khurshid se.
Iqbal actually said that if only he would be able to tap into a Rumi, he would never have died in the state he did.
Yeah. Maulana Rum. That was his sheikh. Although they were ages apart. So inshallah, Sheikh, tomorrow we will discover Tawheed in its form that you said.
People have discovered already.
we will discover the manifestations of Tawheed.
Okay, inshallah,
yeah. The prosperity, justice, economy, security, and all of that collectively is Tawheed.
Inshallah.
That's all we have for reflections in this session today. Inshallah, we'll be back tomorrow. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
छोड़ना तेरा तैबा गवारा नहीं सारे आलम में ऐसा नजारा नहीं ऐसा मंजर जमाने में देखा नहीं ऐसा मंजर जमाने में देखा नहीं जैसा मंजर मदीने में मौजूद है हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर हमने आँखों से देखा नहीं है मगर उनकी तस्वीर सीने में मौजूद है जिसे मिलाकर कलामे इलाही दिया जिसे मिलाकर कलामे